The small town of Pinecrest, Michigan, seemed to breathe differently in the winter of 1993. Snow fell more heavily that year, blanketing the modest homes and businesses that made up the sleepy community of just under 6,000 residents. Local police officers would later remark that the silence was almost deafening during those January nights, a silence that would soon be shattered by one of the most baffling disappearances in American criminal history. December 17, 1993, started like any other Friday in Pinecrest. The local diner served its usual breakfast crowd. Children attended their last day of school before winter break, and Detective James Harlow arrived for his shift at the Pinecrest Police Department at precisely 7:45 a.m., just as he had done for the past 15 years. What no one could have predicted was that by midnight, two people would walk into that police station and vanish without a trace, triggering a nationwide investigation that would uncover decades of corruption, multiple homicides, and a conspiracy so vast that even today, the full truth remains elusive. Thomas Mercer was 43 years old in 1993. A widower raising his 12-year-old daughter, Eliza, alone after his wife succumbed to cancer 3 years prior. Neighbors described Thomas as unremarkable but kind. He worked as an accountant at Western Michigan Federal Credit Union, where colleagues considered him meticulous and trustworthy. His personnel file, later obtained by the FBI, showed perfect attendance and consistently positive performance reviews. Tom was the kind of guy who blended into the wallpaper, said Leonard Palmer, Thomas's supervisor at the credit union. Showed up on time, did his work, never complained. If you'd asked me to describe someone who'd end up at the center of something like this, he'd have been the last person I'd name. Eliza Mercer attended Pinecrest Middle School, where teachers described her as bright but withdrawn. After losing her mother at age 9, the young girl had become increasingly quiet, though her academic performance remained stellar. Her English teacher, Nancy Sullivan, would later tell investigators that Eliza had written a disturbing short story 2 weeks before her disappearance, a tale about a girl who discovers a terrible secret and turns to flee her hometown with her father. When questioned further about this potential clue, Sullivan could only produce a single page of the story. The rest, she claimed, had disappeared from her desk the very day Thomas and Eliza vanished. Security footage from the Pinecrest Police Department, captured by a newly installed camera system, that shows Thomas and Eliza entering the station at 11:47 p.m. on December 17th. Thomas appears agitated, repeatedly glancing over his shoulder while clutching a manila envelope. Eliza stands close to her father, her expression difficult to discern due to the poor video quality. What happened next has been analyzed by federal investigators, forensic experts, and armchair detectives for decades. The footage shows Thomas approaching the front desk, where Officer Peter Landry was on duty. Thomas places the manila envelope on the counter. There appears to be a brief conversation, though no audio was captured. Officer Landry looks inside the envelope, his expression changing dramatically. He picks up the phone, presumably to call someone. At 11:53 p.m., Thomas and Eliza are escorted by Officer Landry through a door leading to the back offices of the station. They were never seen again. The security footage continues running, showing the empty lobby for hours. No one exits through the front door. At 2:16 a.m., the video feed abruptly cuts out for 8 minutes. When it resumes, nothing appears different in the lobby. Officer Landry would later claim that Thomas and Eliza spoke with Detective Harlow for approximately 20 minutes before leaving through a rear exit that wasn't covered by security cameras. According to Landry's official statement, Thomas had come to report suspicious activity at his workplace but decided against filing a formal report after speaking with Detective Harlow. This explanation might have been accepted if not for 3 crucial facts that emerged in the subsequent investigation. First, Detective Harlow wasn't scheduled to work that night, and phone records confirmed he was at home with his wife when Thomas and Eliza allegedly met with him. Second, the manila envelope Thomas brought to the station was never found, nor was any record of its contents documented. Third, Thomas and Eliza's car, a blue 1989 Ford Taurus, remained in the police station parking lot for 3 days before anyone reported them missing. The disappearance might have gone unnoticed even longer if not for Eliza's best friend, Katie Thompson, who had planned to spend the weekend at the Mercer home. When her calls went unanswered and no one came to the door, Katie's mother contacted the school, which in turn reached out to Thomas's employer. It wasn't until December 20th that a missing persons report was finally filed. By then, critical time had been lost. Special Agent Daniel Walsh of the FBI's Detroit field office was assigned to the case on December 22nd. His first action was to secure the Mercer residence, which showed no signs of a struggle or hasty departure. Dishes sat unwashed in the sink. Christmas presents were wrapped and placed under a small tree in the living room. 2 suitcases were found in the basement storage, with no evidence that any luggage had been taken. It looked like they stepped out for an hour and planned to come right back, Agent Walsh noted in his initial report. The only unusual element was the home office. Thomas Mercer's home office had been meticulously organized, too organized, in the opinion of investigators. The filing cabinet contained neatly labeled folders, but many appeared to be empty. The computer, an expensive IBM model that few middle-class families owned in 1993, had been wiped clean of all files. Not a single document remained on the hard drive. Someone wanted us to see an ordinary home, Walsh would later testify during a grand jury proceeding. But they scrubbed it too clean. No one lives that way, especially not an accountant who would have records, receipts, financial documents. The absence of evidence became evidence itself. The investigation took its first major turn when agents discovered a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards of Thomas's closet. Inside was a key to a safety deposit box at First National Bank of Pinecrest, a bank where Thomas didn't hold any known accounts. The contents of that safety deposit box would launch the investigation in a direction no one anticipated. But inside were photographs, dozens of them, showing various Pinecrest officials in compromising situations. The mayor accepting what appeared to be cash in parking lots, the school superintendent meeting with known organized crime figures from Detroit. And most damning of all, Detective James Harlow and Police Chief William Porter, standing over what forensic analysts would later determine was a dead body. Also in the box was a microcassette recorder containing a single audio file, a conversation between Thomas Mercer and Detective Harlow dated November 3, 1993, and 6 weeks before the disappearance. "I know what happened to Frank Doherty," Thomas's voice states clearly on the recording. "I have got the transfer records. I know where the money went and who authorized it." Harlow's response is chilling in its casualness. "You are poking around in things that don't concern you, Tom. The people who ask these kinds of questions tend to have accidents." "That's why I made copies," Thomas replies. "If anything happens to me or Eliza, everything goes to the FBI, the Detroit Free Press, and the State Attorney General." And the recording ends with Harlow saying, "Let me talk to some people. Don't do anything stupid in the meantime." Frank Doherty, the name mentioned in the recording, had been the previous manager at Thomas's credit union. He had allegedly died in a hunting accident in October 1992. His body was found in the woods outside Pinecrest with a single gunshot wound to the chest, ruled accidental by the local coroner. The case was now expanding beyond a simple disappearance. Agent Walsh requested additional resources, and by January 1994, a task force of 12 FBI agents had descended on Pinecrest, setting up operations in the conference room of the Holiday Inn Express just off the highway. Their presence wasn't welcomed by local law enforcement. Chief Porter made it clear we weren't wanted, recalled Agent Teresa Martinez, who specialized in financial crimes. He cited jurisdictional concerns, but we all felt there was more to his resistance. The task force's suspicions were confirmed when they executed a search warrant at Detective Harlow's residence on January 11, 1994. In his garage, they discovered blood evidence that matched Thomas Mercer's type. More disturbing, fibers consistent with the pink sweater Eliza was wearing in the security footage were found in the trunk of Harlow's personal vehicle. Harlow was taken into custody for questioning but released 48 hours later when Police Chief Porter intervened, claiming the search warrant had been improperly executed. By the time a new warrant was obtained, Harlow's home had been thoroughly cleaned, and his vehicle was found burned to a shell in an abandoned quarry 10 miles outside town. The investigation was clearly being obstructed, but by whom and to what extent remained unclear. A breakthrough came when Agent Walsh decided to examine financial records from the Western Michigan Federal Credit Union going back 5 years. What he discovered was a sophisticated money laundering operation using the credit union as a front. Between 1989 and 1993, over $17 million had moved through accounts that appeared legitimate on the surface, but were actually shell companies connected to a Detroit-based crime family. The funds were tied to narcotics trafficking across the Canadian border, with Pinecrest serving as a perfect midpoint between Detroit and Toronto. The small town with its minimal police presence and strategic location near the interstate had been ideal for their operations. Thomas Mercer, as an accountant with access to the credit union's records, must have stumbled upon the irregularities. Perhaps he had initially turned to local law enforcement, not realizing they were already compromised. By February 1994, the FBI had enough evidence to arrest Police Chief Porter on charges of obstruction of justice, tampering with evidence, and conspiracy. During questioning, Porter maintained his innocence, claiming he was being framed by parties unknown. His suicide in his cell 3 days later was officially ruled a hanging, though the medical examiner privately expressed doubts to Agent Walsh. "The angles don't add up," Dr. Helen Crawford told Walsh off the record. "But I have got 3 kids in this town, and I need to keep living here after you all leave." Detective Harlow had disappeared by this point, his house abandoned and his bank accounts emptied. A nationwide manhunt was initiated, but initial leads quickly went cold. With local law enforcement in disarray, the FBI took the unusual step of establishing a temporary field office in Pinecrest, operating out of the same police station where Thomas and Eliza had vanished. Their presence was meant to restore public confidence, but it also served a strategic purpose, allowing agents to thoroughly search the building without additional warrants. On March 12, 1994, while examining the building's architectural plans, Agent Martinez noticed a discrepancy in the basement dimensions. The storage room where evidence was kept appeared smaller than it should have been based on the building's exterior measurements. A closer inspection revealed a false wall, behind which they discovered a small, windowless room approximately 8 feet by 10 feet. The room contained a cot, a sink, and several empty food wrappers. On the concrete floor, agents found traces of blood that matched both Thomas and Eliza Mercer's DNA. Most chilling of all was a Polaroid photograph taped to the wall, showing Thomas and Eliza bound to chairs. A handwritten note on the back read, "Insurance policy. They stay alive until we confirm all copies are secured." The photograph was dated December 18th, the day after they entered the police station. This discovery transformed the investigation. Thomas and Eliza hadn't simply vanished, they had been held captive within the police station itself, possibly for days. But where were they now? The FBI expanded their search to properties owned by Detective Harlow, Police Chief Porter, and other officers identified as potentially corrupt. They also began investigating the Delmano crime family in Detroit, whose fingerprints were all over the money laundering operation at the credit union. In April 1994, a former officer from the Pinecrest Police Department came forward with information that would reshape the timeline of events. Michael Townsend had left the force in 1992 after what he claimed was systematic harassment following his questioning of Frank Doherty's hunting accident. Frank wasn't a hunter, Townsend told investigators. The man was terrified of guns. But when I brought this up, Chief Porter told me to drop it, or I'd be writing parking tickets for the rest of my career. Townsend revealed that corruption within the department predated the money laundering operation. According to his testimony, certain officers had been on the Delmano family payroll since the mid-1980s, initially providing protection for drug shipments passing through town. The operation had expanded when Frank Doherty, who had gambling debts to the Delmanos, was pressured into allowing the credit union to be used for money laundering. Frank wanted out, Townsend explained. He was talking about going to the feds. Next thing you know, he's dead in the woods with a bullet in his chest, and everyone's calling it a hunting accident. When Doherty was eliminated, Thomas Mercer was promoted to his position, likely because the conspirators believed him to be unobservant or easily controlled. They had severely misjudged him. Townsend's testimony provided crucial context, but it didn't bring investigators any closer to finding Thomas and Eliza. The trail had gone cold. Despite one of the most intensive manhunts in FBI history, no trace of the father and daughter could be found. Until July 7, 1994, when a routine traffic stop in Flagstaff, Arizona led to a discovery that would break the case wide open. Arizona State Trooper Samuel Diaz pulled over a Winnebago RV with Michigan plates for a broken taillight. The driver, who identified himself as Richard Peterson, appeared nervous and refused to allow a search of the vehicle. When Trooper Diaz ran the plates, he discovered they belonged to a different vehicle. Backup was called, and the subsequent search of the RV revealed false identification documents, over $50,000 in cash, and a handgun with the serial number filed off. Richard Peterson was taken into custody and fingerprinted. The prints matched Detective James Harlow. FBI agents flew to Arizona immediately. Under intense questioning and facing multiple federal charges, Harlow finally broke. In exchange for considerations in sentencing, he agreed to reveal what had happened to Thomas and Eliza Mercer. According to Harlow, Thomas had indeed discovered the money laundering operation and had gathered substantial evidence. He had initially approached Harlow in confidence, believing him to be one of the few honest officers in the department. This had been a fatal miscalculation. Harlow alerted Police Chief Porter and their contacts in the Delmano family. The decision was made to eliminate Thomas and recover all copies of the evidence he had collected. However, Thomas's threat to distribute the evidence if anything happened to him complicated matters. We needed to know where all the copies were, Harlow told investigators. That's why we took the girl too. Thomas wouldn't talk, but we figured he'd break if we threatened his daughter. When Thomas and Eliza entered the police station that night, they had no idea they were walking into a trap. Harlow claimed that Officer Landry had called him at home, and he had returned to the station secretly. Thomas and Eliza were overpowered and taken to the hidden room in the basement. Porter handled the interrogation, Harlow said. I wasn't in the room, but I could hear the screaming. He was working on the father first, keeping the girl as leverage. According to Harlow, Thomas eventually revealed that copies of his evidence were in the safety deposit box, the same box the FBI had already discovered. He also admitted to sending a package to his brother in Seattle, though he insisted it was just insurance and hadn't been opened. Once they had this information, Porter made the decision to dispose of the problem permanently. Harlow's account became vague at this point. He claimed that Porter and two officers he refused to name had taken Thomas and Eliza from the station in the early hours of December 19th. They were transported in the trunk of Porter's personal vehicle to a hunting cabin owned by one of the Delmano associates. Porter told me they were gone, Harlow stated. I didn't ask questions. In our line of work, it's better not to know details. The cabin Harlow described was located in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, nearly 300 miles from Pinecrest. By the time FBI agents reached the location in late July 1994, the structure had been burned to the ground, and forensic teams sifted through the ashes and surrounding grounds for weeks. They recovered partial human remains. DNA testing, still in its relative infancy in 1994, was inconclusive. The remains were too degraded by fire and exposure to positively identify as Thomas and Eliza Mercer. However, a child's hair barrette found among the ashes matched one Eliza was known to wear, based on school photographs. Harlow was sentenced to 30 years in federal prison for his role in the conspiracy, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. However, without bodies that could be conclusively identified, prosecutors couldn't charge him or anyone else with murder. The investigation continued through the remainder of 1994 and into 1995. Multiple members of the Delmano crime family were indicted on racketeering charges. 6 former officers from the Pinecrest Police Department were convicted of various crimes related to corruption and the money laundering operation. The case file remained active, but leads dwindled. The prevailing theory among investigators was that Thomas and Eliza Mercer had indeed been murdered at the cabin, their remains deliberately destroyed to prevent identification. That theory would stand unchallenged for nearly 2 decades. Then, in September 2013, a package arrived at the FBI field office in Detroit, addressed to Special Agent Daniel Walsh, who had retired 8 years earlier. The package contained no return address, and its contents would reignite one of the most baffling cases in Bureau history. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten note that read simply, "We survived. Now it's time for the truth." The files on the drive included scanned documents from 1993 bank records, transaction logs, and internal memos from the Western Michigan Federal Credit Union, all pointing to the money laundering operation the FBI had uncovered years earlier. But there were also new files, documents that had never been recovered during the original investigation, implicating individuals who had never been charged. The most shocking of all was a video file. When agents played it, they saw an older man and woman sitting side by side. The quality was poor, but the man's voice was clear. "My name is Thomas Mercer. This is my daughter, Eliza. 20 years ago, we walked into the Pinecrest Police Station with evidence of corruption and disappeared. Everyone believes we are dead. The truth is more complicated." As the video continued, Thomas explained that he and Eliza had indeed been held captive in the police station and later transported to the cabin. However, they had managed to escape during the transport when the vehicle slid off an icy road. In the confusion, they fled into the woods. "We knew they would never stop looking for us," Thomas continued in the video. "Our only chance was to disappear completely, to become someone else. So that's what we did." According to Thomas, he and Eliza had made their way to Canada with the help of a distant relative. They had been living under assumed names ever since, first in Toronto and later in Vancouver. Thomas claimed they had tried to contact authorities multiple times in the years immediately following their escape, but fear had always prevented them from following through. "We watched the news. We saw what happened to Chief Porter, to others who crossed these people. The Delmanos might be in prison, but their organization lives on. We couldn't risk it, not until we were sure. Why come forward now, after 20 years? Thomas explained that he had been diagnosed with terminal cancer and given months to live. He didn't want to die with the truth still buried. Eliza deserves to reclaim her life, her identity, and those who tried to kill us, who still haven't paid for their crimes, need to face justice. The video ended with Thomas providing details about individuals who had never been implicated in the original investigation: judges, prosecutors, and business leaders who had allegedly been part of the money laundering network. FBI analysts authenticated the video to the extent possible. The man did appear to be an aged version of Thomas Mercer, based on facial recognition software. But the woman's resemblance to what Eliza might look like as an adult was also striking. But was it really them, and if so, where were they now? The return address on the package was a post office box in Vancouver that had been rented for 1 month and paid for in cash. Canadian authorities assisted in reviewing security footage from the post office, but the person who had mailed the package wore a hat and kept their face turned away from cameras. As the FBI reopened the investigation and began pursuing the new leads provided in the files, they faced a critical question: if Thomas and Eliza Mercer were alive, why hadn't they come forward in person? Why send an anonymous package with a video instead of walking into an FBI office? The answer would come 3 months later, when Canadian police responded to a house fire in a suburban neighborhood outside Vancouver. Among the ruins, they found 2 bodies. Dental records confirmed that the male victim was indeed Thomas Mercer. The female victim, however, could not be positively identified as Eliza Mercer. There were no adult dental records for comparison, and the fire had destroyed much of the physical evidence. And the cause of the fire was determined to be arson. Had someone silenced Thomas and Eliza just as they were finally ready to come forward? Or was there more to the story, a deeper level of deception that even the FBI hadn't uncovered? As 2013 drew to a close, Special Agent Doyle, who had taken over the reopened case, They discovered something unusual while reviewing Thomas Mercer's original employment records from the credit union. Thomas had completed an advanced accounting program at the University of Michigan in 1987. Among his professors was Dr. Richard Keaton, who specialized in forensic accounting and had previously worked as a consultant for the FBI on financial crimes. When Doyle contacted Dr. Keaton, now retired, his response was unexpected. "I always wondered if he'd use what I taught him," Keaton said. "Thomas was my best student. He understood that numbers tell stories and that sometimes the best place to hide is in plain sight." According to Keaton, Thomas had approached him in early 1993 with concerns about irregularities he'd discovered at the credit union. Keaton had advised him to collect evidence carefully and then take it to federal authorities, bypassing local law enforcement entirely. "I warned him about the risks," Keaton recalled. "I told him to create an escape plan, just in case." I never heard from him again after that conversation, but when I saw the news about his disappearance, I feared the worst. Had Thomas's escape plan included a contingency for faking their deaths a second time if they were discovered? The arson investigator in Vancouver had noted that the fire appeared to have been set to create maximum damage while minimizing the chance of saving any occupants. Yet the bodies had been found in beds, suggesting they were asleep when the fire started or that someone wanted it to appear that way. As Agent Doyle dug deeper, she discovered that a woman matching Eliza Mercer's description had boarded a flight from Vancouver to Sydney, Australia the day before the fire. The passport used was later determined to be fraudulent. The investigation now spanned 3 countries and nearly 30 years. Were Thomas and Eliza victims or masterminds? Had they been running from killers all this time, or orchestrating an elaborate scheme of their own? The truth, as Agent Doyle would discover in the spring of 2014, was more complex than anyone had imagined and reached far beyond a small-town money laundering operation into the highest levels of power in America. Spring 2014 brought torrential rains to the Pacific Northwest, washing away soil on a remote property 40 miles east of Vancouver. A hiker discovered what appeared to be human remains partially exposed in a ravine. Forensic analysis would later confirm these remains belonged to Anthony Visconti, a mid-level associate of the Delmano crime family who had disappeared in January 1994, just weeks after Thomas and Eliza Mercer vanished. Visconti had never been implicated in the original investigation. His disappearance had been attributed to internal conflict within the Delmano organization. The discovery of his remains, however, with a bullet wound to the back of the skull, suggested a connection to the Mercer case that had previously gone unnoticed. Visconti wasn't just any soldier in the Delmano family, explained Special Agent Lauren Doyle during a briefing at FBI headquarters in April 2014. According to our organized crime division, he specialized in making people disappear. He was their cleaner. The implications were disturbing. Had Visconti been sent to eliminate Thomas and Eliza? If so, who had eliminated him? And why bury his body thousands of miles from Michigan, in the same region where Thomas and Eliza had apparently been living? Agent Doyle's investigation took her to Australia in pursuit of the woman believed to be Eliza Mercer. Immigration records showed the passenger traveling on the fraudulent passport had entered the country but hadn't departed through any official channels. The trail seemed to go cold until Doyle received an unexpected call from the Australian Federal Police. They'd arrested a woman for identity fraud in Brisbane, Doyle later documented. She wasn't Eliza Mercer, but she admitted to being paid $10,000 to use the fraudulent passport and make a very public appearance at Sydney Airport. The woman, Veronica Winters, was a small-time con artist with no previous connection to the case. She claimed to have been approached online by someone offering cash for what they described as participation in a performance art piece about identity and surveillance. "I never met anyone in person," Winters told Australian authorities. Everything was arranged through encrypted emails. The money was deposited in a temporary account I could access. The passport arrived by courier with detailed instructions on what to wear, how to act, even how to style my hair. This revelation suggested an elaborate misdirection, someone wanting authorities to believe Eliza had fled to Australia while she went elsewhere. But who would go to such lengths? Was Eliza herself orchestrating these deceptions, or was she being hunted by someone who needed to maintain the illusion she was still alive? Doyle returned to Vancouver to re-examine the scene of the house fire. The official investigation had concluded that an accelerant had been used, primarily in the bedrooms and around the bodies. This pointed to murder rather than an attempt to fake deaths. The male victim had definitely been Thomas Mercer, but the female victim's identity remained ambiguous. Partial DNA recovered from the scene didn't match any samples from the Mercer residence collected back in 1994. However, dental work on the female victim indicated procedures typical of Eastern Europe, not North America. Was it possible that Thomas had been living with someone other than Eliza? Or had Eliza undergone extensive dental work to further obscure her identity? In July 2014, the investigation took another unexpected turn when Agent Doyle received a package at her hotel in Vancouver. Like the package sent to the Detroit field office months earlier, this one contained a USB drive. Unlike the previous delivery, this package included a note with specific instructions: Motel 6, Portland, Oregon, room 118. July 15th, 8 p.m. Come alone. Then, surveillance footage from the hotel showed the package being delivered by a standard courier service. The sender had used another untraceable temporary identity. It was clearly a trap, Doyle acknowledged in her report. But it was also the only solid lead we had. After consulting with her superiors, a decision was made to proceed with caution. Doyle would go to the meeting, but with substantial backup and surveillance in place. The USB drive contained only a single file of video showing a woman in her early 30s speaking directly to the camera. Though aged 20 years from the school photographs, her features were recognizably those of Eliza Mercer. "Agent Doyle, I know you are looking for me," the woman began. "You need to stop. You have no idea what you are getting into or who you are really dealing with." She explained that the fire in Vancouver had been set to kill her father, not by him or her. Thomas had indeed been dying of cancer, but his death had been accelerated by those who feared what he was about to reveal. The woman who died wasn't me. She was my father's nurse, Katerina. They killed her because they couldn't find me, and they needed to send a message. According to Eliza, her father had accumulated far more evidence over the years than what he had sent to the FBI. The money laundering operation in Pinecrest had been merely one small part of a much larger criminal enterprise that reached into federal law enforcement, the judiciary, police, and even Congress. My father wanted to come forward to end this before he died naturally. I begged him to reconsider. These people don't just control police departments in small Michigan towns. Their reach goes all the way to Washington. The video ended with Eliza warning Doyle, "If you come to Portland, you will be meeting people who want me silenced. They have probably already compromised members of your team. Trust no one." Then, the message was troubling on multiple levels. If accurate, it suggested corruption far beyond what the original investigation had uncovered. But it could also be an elaborate misdirection, designed to sow distrust among law enforcement and derail the investigation. After extensive discussion with the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, Doyle and her superiors decided to proceed with the Portland meeting, but with extreme caution. Every member of the operation was vetted extensively. The plan was modified multiple times, with final details shared only minutes before execution. On July 15, 2014, Doyle arrived at the Motel 6 in Portland. Room 118 was registered to a John Smith, paid for in cash. Surveillance had been in place for hours, but no one had entered or exited the room. At precisely 8 p.m., Doyle knocked on the door. There was no response. After following protocol for potentially dangerous entry, the room was breached. It was empty, save for a laptop computer sitting on the bed. The screen showed a live video feed. On it was Eliza Mercer, now speaking in real time. "Hello, Agent Doyle. I'm sorry for the theatrics, but I needed to be certain you weren't followed by the wrong people." Eliza explained that she was communicating from a secure location. She claimed to have evidence implicating former Senator Howard Grant in orchestrating the original money laundering operation. Grant, who had served as chairman of the Senate Banking Committee in the 1990s, had allegedly used his position to protect certain financial institutions from regulatory scrutiny in exchange for their participation in laundering funds. My father discovered the connection back in 1993, but he couldn't prove it. That's why they were so desperate to silence us. It wasn't just about a local police department on the take. It was about protecting a man who would later become Vice President of the United States. Howard Grant had indeed served as Vice President from 2001 to 2005, before retiring from politics due to what was publicly described as health concerns. He had died in 2010 of apparent natural causes. His death wasn't natural, Eliza claimed. When my father gathered enough evidence to finally expose him, Grant was eliminated by the same people who are now hunting me. They are cleaning up loose ends, Agent Doyle, and you are becoming one of those loose ends. The conversation was interrupted by sounds of commotion on Eliza's end of the video feed. Her expression changed to one of alarm, and the feed abruptly cut out. Minutes later, Doyle received an alert from the FBI team monitoring communications in the area. A 911 call had reported gunshots at an address across town. By the time local police and FBI agents arrived at the location, an apartment in a nondescript building in northeast Portland, the scene showed clear signs of a violent struggle. Blood spatter analysis indicated at least one person had been seriously wounded. A laptop matching the one used for the video call was found smashed on the floor. Forensic analysis would later recover partial files, including fragments of the documents Eliza had mentioned, financial records linking Senator Grant to suspicious transactions through banks known to have laundered money for organized crime. But of Eliza herself there was no sign. Only blood type A negative, matching the genetic profile the FBI had constructed from samples taken from the Mercer residence back in 1994. Had Eliza been killed, wounded and taken? Or had she escaped, leaving blood evidence behind to suggest the worst? The investigation had reached another apparent dead end. Yet something about the timing troubled Agent Doyle. The attack on Eliza's location had occurred almost simultaneously with the FBI team's arrival at the motel. This suggested either incredible coincidence or, more disturbing, that someone within the FBI operation had alerted Eliza's pursuers. "We have a leak," Doyle told her supervisor, Assistant Director Robert Montgomery. "Someone knew exactly where we would be and when. They used us to find her." Montgomery, a 30-year veteran of the Bureau who had worked organized crime cases throughout his career, took the accusation seriously. He initiated an internal investigation, severely restricting access to information about the Mercer case. "This goes beyond usual operational security," he informed Doyle. "From now on, you report directly to me. No electronic communications, no shared files. We treat everyone as a potential compromise." In the weeks that followed, Doyle worked essentially alone, following leads with minimal backup and resources. The approach was unorthodox and potentially dangerous, but it was the only way to ensure operational integrity. Her investigation led her to a startling discovery in August 2014. While reviewing financial records connected to Senator Grant, she identified a pattern of payments from a shell company to various individuals over 2 decades. Most were small amounts, consistent with regular compensation for services rendered. But occasional large payments coincided with significant events in the Mercer case, including one substantial transfer in December 1993, just days after Thomas and Eliza disappeared. The recipient of that payment was Michael Townsend, the former Pinecrest police officer who had come forward as a whistleblower in 1994, claiming to have been forced out of the department for asking questions about Frank Doherty's death. Townsend wasn't forced out, Doyle realized. He was rewarded. His whistleblowing was part of the cover-up. By providing seemingly damaging but limited information about corruption in the Pinecrest Police Department, Townsend had helped direct the original investigation away from higher-level involvement. His testimony had supported the narrative that the corruption was primarily local, connected to the Delmano crime family but not extending to federal levels. Townsend was now living in Arizona under his own name, apparently confident that his role had never been discovered. When Doyle arrived at his home in Scottsdale, she found him relaxing by his pool, seemingly without a care in the world. Agent Doyle, he greeted her with a smile that quickly faded when he saw her expression. Is something wrong? 20 years of payments from Grant Enterprises, Doyle replied, placing financial records on the table between them, including a bonus of $250,000 right after Thomas and Eliza Mercer disappeared. You want to explain that, Mr. Townsend? Townsend's demeanor changed instantly. Wanbo's Mako Tomstay. You have no idea what you are dealing with. That's what Eliza Mercer said. Right before someone tried to kill her. Was that your doing too? Townsend laughed bitterly. Eliza Mercer has been playing you, Agent Doyle, just like her father played all of us back in '93. According to Townsend, Thomas Mercer hadn't stumbled upon the money laundering operation by accident. He had been part of it from the beginning, a skilled accountant recruited specifically to manage the complex financial maneuvers required to move millions through the credit union, and undetected. Thomas got greedy, Townsend claimed. He started skimming. When the Delmanos figured it out, he knew he was dead. So he grabbed his daughter and ran, but not before stealing millions and fabricating evidence to make himself look like a whistleblower instead of a thief. Townsend insisted that his own role had been minor, merely to provide misleading information to the FBI to protect Senator Grant's involvement. He claimed he had no knowledge of what had happened to Thomas and Eliza after they entered the police station. The last I heard, they were both killed at that cabin. Finding out Thomas was alive in Vancouver was as much a surprise to me as it was to you. Doyle was skeptical. So you expect me to believe that Thomas Mercer, this supposedly master criminal that just happened to send evidence to the FBI implicating you and others right before he died of cancer? Why wait 20 years if he had the evidence all along? Townsend's answer was unexpected. Because of Eliza. Thomas might have been a thief, but he loved his daughter. He kept quiet all these years to protect her. The agreement was simple: they'd disappear, keep the money they stole, and never speak about what they knew. In return, they get to live. Then why come forward now? Thomas was dying. He had nothing left to lose, but Eliza still does. Doyle pressed further. If Thomas was part of the operation, why try to kill him and Eliza? Why not just fire him or have him arrested for the skimming? You don't understand how these things work, Townsend replied. The Delmanos don't fire people who know too much. And this wasn't just their operation. The people involved couldn't risk exposure at any level. Before Doyle could respond, her phone rang. It was Assistant Director Montgomery with urgent news. Blood from the Portland apartment had been analyzed more thoroughly. It wasn't Eliza Mercer's blood. The DNA didn't match the profile constructed from the Mercer residence samples. Then whose blood is it? Doyle asked. That's the interesting part, Montgomery replied. It matches a sample collected at a crime scene in Detroit 3 weeks ago. A lawyer named Catherine Thompson was found murdered in her office. She specialized in witness protection cases. The name struck Doyle immediately. Katie Thompson had been Eliza's best friend in 1993, the girl who had been planning to spend the weekend at the Mercer home, whose mother had ultimately reported them missing. I need everything we have on Catherine Thompson, Doyle told Montgomery, and I need to know who's investigating her murder. As Doyle ended the call, she turned back to Townsend, who was watching her with a calculating expression. You should walk away from this, he advised. Some cases don't get solved for a reason. Is that a threat, Mr. Townsend? It's a friendly warning. The people involved in this have been manipulating events for decades. You are seeing exactly what they want you to see, following breadcrumbs they have left for you. Doyle had Townsend taken into custody as a material witness, though she knew the charges might not stick. His financial records provided clear evidence of payments from Grant-connected entities, but but proving his direct knowledge of criminal activity after so many years would be challenging. The Detroit field office provided information on Catherine Thompson's murder investigation. She had been found in her office with her throat cut, apparently surprised by her killer while working late. The case had initially appeared to be a robbery gone wrong, but certain details suggested a professional hit disguised as a random crime. Thompson had changed her name legally in 1998 from Catherine to Katie. Before then, she had been known professionally as Catherine Williams. The name change had coincided with her specialization in witness protection cases. She stayed in touch with Eliza all these years, Doyle theorized. Perhaps even helped her and Thomas establish new identities. When Thomas decided to come forward, she got involved again. Phone records showed that Thompson had traveled to Vancouver twice in the months before Thomas Mercer's death. She had also visited Portland just days before the confrontation in the apartment. Was Thompson the female victim in the Vancouver fire, not a nurse named Katerina as Eliza had claimed? Had Eliza been lying about that detail, or had she been genuinely mistaken about the identity of the second victim? The investigation had become a complex web of conflicting narratives. Was Thomas Mercer a whistleblower or a thief? Was Eliza continuing her father's quest for justice or orchestrating an elaborate deception? And how did Catherine Thompson fit into the puzzle? Doyle's next breakthrough came from an unexpected source. During a routine review of evidence from the Portland apartment, forensic technicians discovered a microsed card hidden in the battery compartment of a smoke detector. The card contained encrypted files that, once decoded, revealed a journal apparently written by Thomas Mercer between 2010 and 2013. The journal painted a very different picture than either the whistleblower or the thief narrative. According to Thomas's own words, he had indeed been recruited to manage the money laundering operation at the credit union, but not willingly. His wife's cancer treatments had been extremely expensive, draining the family's savings. Frank Doherty, then his supervisor, had approached him with an offer to help manage certain special accounts and receive substantial bonuses that would cover the medical bills. I told myself it was temporary, Thomas wrote, just until Emily was better. But then she died anyway, and I was already in too deep. And they had evidence of my involvement that would have sent me to prison. Eliza would have ended up in foster care. I couldn't let that happen. Thomas described how he had continued working within the operation while secretly documenting everything: transactions, names, their connections, initially as insurance to protect himself and Eliza, but increasingly with the intention of eventually exposing the entire network. Frank figured out what I was doing. One entry read, he was going to turn me in to save himself. I tried to convince him we could go to the FBI together, but he was too scared. The next day he was dead. That's when I knew we had to run. The journal confirmed that Thomas and Eliza had indeed escaped during transport to the cabin, though not by accident as claimed in the video. Catherine Thompson's mother had been part of their escape plan all along. When Thomas realized that local law enforcement was compromised, he had arranged for Katie to discover them missing, but knowing her mother would report it to the school rather than directly to police. During the transport to the cabin, Thomas had used a handcuff key Katie's mother had smuggled to Eliza during a brief supervised bathroom break at the police station. They had overpowered Officer Landry, who was driving, causing the vehicle to crash. In the confusion, they had fled into the woods, eventually making their way to a pre-arranged meeting point where Katie's mother was waiting with cash, supplies, and false identification documents. I killed Landry, Thomas wrote. I didn't mean to. I just wanted to incapacitate him. But when he pulled his gun, I had no choice. I couldn't let Eliza see, but she knew. At 12 years old, my daughter became an accessory to killing a police officer. I have lived with that guilt every day since. The journal indicated that Thomas, Eliza, and Katie's mother had fled to Canada together, establishing new identities. Katie's mother eventually returned to Michigan under her own name, confident that her involvement would never be discovered. She had maintained contact with Thomas and Eliza throughout the years, serving as their connection to their former lives. Mary promised to send Katie to law school, Thomas wrote, referring to Katie Thompson's mother. And her daughter would become the lawyer who could eventually help us come forward safely. It was a 20-year plan. I didn't think I'd live to see it completed. The most shocking revelation came in the final entries. Thomas claimed that Vice President Howard Grant hadn't died of natural causes in 2010. He was alive and living under an assumed identity. The heart attack was staged, Thomas wrote. When new evidence emerged connecting him to the Delmano operations, his associates helped him disappear. The funeral was closed casket for a reason. I have seen him with my own eyes in Vancouver. The man who tried to have us killed is enjoying his retirement while others take the fall for his crimes. This claim seemed fantastical, a former vice president faking his death and living in secret. Yet Thomas provided specific details, including an address in Vancouver where he claimed to have photographed Grant. The final entry, dated just weeks before his death, indicated that Thomas planned to deliver these photographs and additional evidence to the FBI. Eliza disagrees with my decision, he wrote. She thinks it's too dangerous, that Grant's network is still too powerful. But I'm dying anyway. What more can they do to me? It's time for the truth. No photographs were found on the Pinecrest card. Had they been removed before Doyle discovered it? Or had Thomas never managed to take them in the first place? And the journal provided a new direction for the investigation. If Howard Grant was indeed alive, finding him would break the case wide open. But verifying such an extraordinary claim would require extraordinary evidence. Doyle traveled to Vancouver once more, this time to the address Thomas had mentioned in his journal. It was an upscale condominium building with extensive security. Property records showed the unit in question belonged to a corporation registered in the Cayman Islands, with no individual named as owner. Surveillance of the building proved challenging due to its security systems and private status. After 3 days of observation, Doyle had identified several residents, but none resembling Howard Grant, even allowing for plastic surgery and aging. We need to get inside that unit, Doyle told Montgomery during their secure call. But if Grant is living there, or was recently, there might be evidence. We don't have jurisdiction in Canada, Montgomery reminded her. And we don't have enough for a formal request for assistance based on a journal entry alone. What if we had more? What if Eliza Mercer is still alive and willing to testify? No, Doyle admitted, but I think I know who might. Catherine Thompson's office in Detroit had been thoroughly processed as a crime scene, but then... Doyle suspected there might be information the local investigators had missed, information specific to the Mercer case that only someone familiar with its details would recognize a Russian as significant. Later, too, with permission from Detroit PD, Doyle re-examined Thompson's office personally. Her attention was drawn to a collection of framed photographs on the wall, Catherine with various clients, presumably after successful case resolutions. In one photo, taken approximately 5 years earlier based on the date discreetly printed in the corner, Catherine stood beside a woman whose features, although different in many respects from Eliza's childhood photographs, retained certain distinctive characteristics around the eyes and jawline. The photograph was labeled simply Calgary 2009. Calgary, Alberta, another Canadian location, but far from Vancouver. Was this a deliberate misdirection, or had Eliza been moving between locations to avoid detection? Doyle's search of Thompson's office also yielded an address book with encoded entries. The encryption was simple, a basic substitution cipher that Thompson had apparently used to record sensitive client information. Among the entries was one for EM, with an address in Calgary that matched no records in public databases. In September 2014, Doyle traveled to Calgary. The address led to a self-storage facility on the outskirts of the city. Unit 317, registered to Elisa Martin, contained furniture and personal belongings that appeared to have been placed there approximately 3 months earlier, according to the facility manager. Ms. Martin paid for a year in advance, he explained. Said she was traveling but would be back for her things eventually. Among the items was a locked metal case. With proper authorization from Canadian authorities, Doyle was able to open it. Inside were documents, external hard drives, and a sealed envelope addressed to the Federal Bureau of Investigation in the event of my death. The envelope contained a letter from Eliza Mercer, dated June 2014. If you are reading this, I'm either dead or believed to be. Everything my father documented is true. Senator Howard Grant orchestrated the money laundering operation that we discovered in 1993. When he became vice president in 2001, he used his influence to bury any remaining connections to the case. His death in 2010 was staged when new evidence emerged linking him to organized crime. My father wanted justice. I just wanted to survive. When he decided to come forward, I knew they would kill us both. I tried to protect him, but I failed. Now I'm the only one left who knows the full truth, and they won't stop until I'm silenced too. The enclosed drives contain everything: financial records, photographs, video recordings, and testimony from others involved who have since died. Most importantly, they contain recent footage of Howard Grant alive in Vancouver as of April 2014. I don't expect to survive long enough to testify, but perhaps this evidence will be enough without me. I entrust it to whichever brave agent finds this storage unit. Be careful, their reach extends into the Bureau itself. The letter was signed simply EM. The hard drives did indeed contain extensive evidence, including video footage apparently shot with a concealed camera, showing a man strongly resembling Howard Grant entering and exiting the Vancouver condominium. Facial recognition analysis, accounting for aging and some apparent cosmetic surgery, indicated a 92% probability that the man was Grant. This is unprecedented, Assistant Director Montgomery told Doyle when she reported her findings. The former vice president faking his death to escape prosecution. The political implications are enormous. The criminal implications are what concern me, Doyle replied. This man orchestrated multiple murders, including attempts on a 12-year-old girl. Whether he was vice president or not doesn't change that. With the new evidence, the FBI was able to secure cooperation from Canadian authorities for surveillance of the Vancouver condominium. In October 2014, the man believed to be Howard Grant was observed leaving the building. He was followed to a private medical facility specializing in plastic surgery and anti-aging treatments. During his appointment, a DNA sample was surreptitiously obtained from a discarded coffee cup. Analysis confirmed what the facial recognition had suggested: the man was indeed Howard Grant, former Vice President of the United States, officially deceased since 2010. The case now extended far beyond a missing father and daughter from a small Michigan town. It involved a former high-ranking government official, organized crime, and a conspiracy spanning decades. The Department of Justice assembled a special task force, with Agent Doyle appointed as lead investigator. On November 12, 2014, Howard Grant was taken into custody by Canadian authorities for extradition to the United States. The arrest was conducted quietly, with no media presence. The official statement indicated only that an American citizen had been arrested in connection with an ongoing investigation into financial crimes and multiple homicides. Grant's identity was not immediately disclosed to the public. Officials feared the political fallout and wanted to ensure all aspects of the case were thoroughly documented before making such an explosive announcement. During initial questioning, Grant maintained his innocence, claiming mistaken identity. When presented with the DNA evidence, he requested legal representation and refused to answer further questions. But as the case against Grant was being assembled, the search for Eliza Mercer continued. The blood in the Portland apartment remained unidentified, and no further communication had been received since the video call in July. Was Eliza dead, as the letter in the storage unit seemed to anticipate? Or was she in hiding, watching from a distance as the case against Grant proceeded? The answer came in December 2014, when Agent Doyle received another package, this one delivered directly to her apartment in Washington, D.C., bypassing all FBI security protocols. Inside was a single photograph showing Doyle entering her building the previous evening, taken from a vehicle across the street. On the back was written, "We need to talk. Alone, December 18th, 5 p.m., Roosevelt Memorial." The implication was clear. Eliza Mercer was alive and had been watching Doyle. More disturbing, she knew where Doyle lived and could apparently deliver packages without being detected. Against protocol, but following her instincts, Doyle went to the meeting alone. As she stood by the memorial in the fading winter light, a woman approached and sat beside her on a bench. "Thank you for coming, Agent Doyle," the woman said quietly. "And for not bringing backup. They are still out there, you know, Grant's people. His arrest hasn't ended this." It was Eliza Mercer, now 33 years old, her appearance altered by more than just the passage of time. Subtle changes to her facial structure suggested multiple cosmetic procedures over the years. "You have been watching me," Doyle stated. "I have been watching everyone," Eliza replied. "It's how I have stayed alive this long." According to Eliza, the confrontation in Portland had been an attempt to kidnap, not kill her. She had managed to escape, but not before injuring one of her attackers, explaining the blood evidence at the scene. "They wanted me alive to find out what evidence I had and who else knew about it. Dead, I become a martyr. My files get released. They couldn't risk that." "And Catherine Thompson, was she helping you?" Eliza's expression darkened. "Katie was my best friend for 30 years. She died because of me, because she was trying to arrange my testimony against Grant. They killed her to send me a message. The woman who died in the fire with your father, and that really was his nurse, Katerina. Katie had never been to the house in Vancouver. They didn't know about her connection to us until after my father died." Eliza explained that she had gone into deeper hiding after the Portland incident, using identities and resources even Catherine hadn't known about. She had been monitoring the investigation from afar, including Grant's arrest. "It's not enough," she insisted. "Grant is just one man. The network he built is still operational. There are judges, FBI agents, politicians still on their payroll. They will find a way to discredit the evidence or silence witnesses. They might even arrange for Grant to die in custody before he can stand trial." "Then testify," Doyle urged. "Come in officially. With your testimony and the evidence you have collected, we can break this wide open." Eliza shook her head. "The moment I enter FBI custody, I'm dead. I have seen what they can do from inside the system." "Then what do you want from me?" "Insurance," Eliza replied. "I have copies of everything, every document, recording, photograph. I have arranged for them to be released to every major news organization simultaneously if anything happens to me. But I need someone on the inside I can trust. Someone to make sure the case proceeds regardless of the pressure to bury it." "Why me?" "Because you have proven you can't be bought or intimidated. You have followed this case further than anyone, despite the risks. My father would have trusted you. That's good enough for me." Eliza provided Doyle with a secure communication protocol they could use to stay in contact. And she also revealed the location of additional evidence implicating others in Grant's network, including a federal judge who had helped quash the original investigation in 1994. "I will testify eventually," Eliza promised. "But not until I'm confident the system can't be manipulated to protect them anymore. Until then, I will keep watching, and I will keep collecting evidence." As she stood to leave, Eliza handed Doyle a final envelope. "This is for Katie's mother. Please tell her I'm sorry, and that her daughter died trying to do the right thing, just like my father." Before Doyle could respond, Eliza walked away, disappearing into the gathering darkness of the December evening. The envelope contained a handwritten letter and a key to a safety deposit box. And the contents of that box would later prove crucial in corroborating Thomas Mercer's journal and strengthening the case against Howard Grant. In January 2015, the Department of Justice made the stunning announcement that former Vice President Howard Grant had been arrested and charged with multiple crimes, including money laundering, conspiracy, and accessory to murder. And the revelation that he had faked his death, to avoid prosecution sent shockwaves through the political establishment. Grant's trial was scheduled for September 2015. As that date approached, pressure mounted on the prosecution from various quarters. Key witnesses reported threats. Evidence was challenged on procedural grounds. A motion was filed to dismiss the case entirely based on Grant's supposed declining health. Throughout these maneuvers, Agent Doyle maintained secure communication with Eliza Mercer, who continued providing information from her hidden vantage point. Her insights proved invaluable in countering the defense's strategies and identifying potential interference from Grant's network. 2 weeks before the trial was set to begin, Howard Grant was found dead in his cell, an apparent suicide, though circumstances suggested otherwise. Without their primary defendant, prosecutors shifted focus to the broader conspiracy, using evidence provided by both Thomas and Eliza Mercer to indict 18 other individuals connected to the criminal network. Eliza Mercer never testified publicly, and her role in breaking the case remained largely unknown outside a small circle of investigators. Whether she ever emerged from hiding is a matter of speculation. Some reports suggest she assumed yet another identity and relocated overseas. Others claim she remained in the United States, continuing to monitor the prosecutions from afar. What is certain is that the case that began with a father and daughter walking into a small-town police station in 1993 ultimately exposed one of the most far-reaching criminal conspiracies in American history, a web of corruption that had extended from a local credit union to the second highest office in the land. The full truth about Thomas and Eliza Mercer may never be known. Were they whistleblowers or opportunists, victims or masterminds? The narrative shifted depending on who was telling the story and what evidence was being considered. In her final report on the case, filed in December 2015, Agent Lauren Doyle offered perhaps the most balanced assessment. Thomas and Eliza Mercer were ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances. Their choices, some admirable, others questionable, were made under unimaginable pressure. And they survived by adapting, by becoming as ruthless and calculating as those who hunted them. But in doing so, they lost something of themselves along the way. But they never lost sight of the truth, nor their determination to see it revealed, whatever the cost. The Pinecrest Police Station still stands today, though the department was disbanded and reconstituted following the scandals of